In this lesson, we're going to examine an application of sequences and series in the finance world. We're going to look at simple interest. The idea behind simple interest is when you put money into a bank or you borrow money from a bank, you either get paid for putting it in there or you owe for borrowing it for a certain amount of time. We call that interest. Now, there's different kinds of interest. We're going to look at simple interest today. The way it's going to work is we'll look at this first example just to get an idea. If we have $100 that we made over the summer and put this in the bank for a year, making 5% interest, how much money would you have now? Well, your interest is a percentage of your principal. Principal is how much money you put in. So percentage, ours is 5%. Right? That's a decimal, 0.05. Of means multiply. How much do we put in? $100. And we get $5. So how much money would we have now? Our total would be what we started with, plus that 5, or $105. And some of the keys here are, well, we have to know how much money we started with, our principal. We need to know our percent, and we need to know how much time we put in the bank for. By putting it in for 1 year, it's a really simple calculation. But if we put in for longer periods of time, the calculation does not get a whole lot more difficult. We just figure out how long we put it in for, and at the end of that, we can multiply by how often we want to calculate something. Because our interest is only calculated a single time at the end of it, our growth is going to be a linear growth. So we start off at 5% this year, and then 5 more percent the next year, and 5 more percent, and 5 more percent, and so on. And we can figure out any time how much money do we have. This is time. This would be money. We could say, well, we have this amount, and then we have this amount, and then we have this amount, and so on and so on. So we actually have a little formula here for simple interest. And careful, it's got to be simple interest. Our simple interest is made up of 3 things. The principal, you start with, your rate, make sure we write as a decimal, and our time. And our time is always measured in years. So in the previous one, we didn't say it, but really it should have been times 1 here. Principal times rate times time. The order that you multiply these things in doesn't matter, as long as you multiply all 3 things together. P times R times T. And that'll give you your interest. That's what we want to figure out. So we'll look at some examples. So suppose we have $5,200, sorry, $5,235. That would be our principal. And we want to invest it for 3 years. That's our time at a rate of 6.8%. There's our rate. How much interest would we make? So I equals P, 5235, times rate as a decimal. So if you ever want to change percents in a decimal, just divide by 100, right? So I'll give us 0.068. So the rate is 0.068, only with the decimal spots, 2 spots to the left, times time. And punch it all into our calculator, and we'd end up with $1,067.94. Just by leaving the bank, not touching it for a while, you get to earn some money. Okay, try another one. We have $1,225. Again, that's our principal. We're going to invest it for 3 months. Now that's time, but not exactly time, because time is supposed to be in years. So we'll come back to that. And rate, 5%. How much money do we have? Or sorry, how much interest do we have? That's kind of important, interest, not money. So our interest, I equals P times rate, 5% as a decimal is 0.05, times time. Now time has to be in years. So 3 months in years. Well, years are always measured in 12 months, right? So we have a portion of that, 3 out of 12. Now you can write in there as a fraction if you want to, or if you want to, it's a nice decimal, it's a quarter, right? 0.25, we could use that too. But we have to make sure that time is in years. So multiply that all together, and we end up with $15.31. The longer you leave things in, the more money they make. 3 months is not very long to leave a chunk of money in the bank. Okay, we'll try another one. We have Josh. He received his monthly MasterCard bill. He owes $423. That's the principal. MasterCard charges 16 3/4 interest. Here's our rate. And he's 16 days late. Here's our time. How much does he owe? So, I gotta figure out how much interest he has to pay first of all. So $423.89. Our rate got to be in years, or sorry, percent to a decimal. So we have 16 3/4, which is really like 16.75. Now that has a decimal in it, but still a percent. So to completely turn to a percent, we've got to move that decimal 2 spots to the left. So our rate is 0.1675. And just because of the percent, a decimal in it doesn't mean it's a decimal number. It can't be a percent anymore. And then our time. Our time is measured in days this time. So we have a fraction again. And we have to know what fraction a year is measured in. So 365 days. Okay, all into our calculator at once. You can use your fraction button or do this times 16 and then divide by 365. That works too. So he owes $3.11 in interest. So the question was, how much does he owe in total? Well, his total is made of how much he was late on his bill, plus the interest that's accumulated. So $3.11. So you owe the total of $427. Okay, there's some simple interest things. Now, sometimes we can do some problem solving. So we can work forwards and backwards and things like that. So a couple key ideas to remember. The amount, like the last question, is always made up of your principal plus your interest. So sometimes you know your amount and you know your interest, and you want to solve for your principal. So you can rearrange this equation. You can work backward and forward with it. Okay, and there's some other slightly nice versions of this equation we can use too. We can use P plus PRT, or if you common factor, P bracket 1 plus RT. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to try and problem solve, work backwards through problems to figure out unknown things. So we got Susan. Susan has a $2,000 investment, and it paid her $210 at the end of 1 year. So this was her principal, and this was her interest. Okay, at the end of 1 year, there's her time. What was the interest rate? We're looking for R. So I know I can use this equation, I equals PRT, as long as I know 3 of the 4 things, which we do. We know our interest, we know our principal, we don't know our R, so we'll call it R. We do know our time was 1. So I'm going to multiply these 3 things together. 2,000 times R times 1 is 2,000 R. And if I want to solve for R, I can do that by dividing out the interest by the remaining. So my R value that I get is 0.105, or in other words, a rate of, we turn back to percents, because that's usually how we talk about them, 10.5%. You can do that by multiplying by 100, or moving your decimal 2 spots to the right. Let's try another one. Teresa lent Aaron money 3 years ago. There's our time right there. At a rate of 14%, there's R. He repaid her in full plus the interest, which was $340. There's your interest, right? I was $340. So how much did she lend him? All right, so we're taking our formula. I equals PRT. What do we know? Our interest is $340. We don't know how much she borrowed. We do know the rate was 14% or 0.14. Our time, we said, was 3 years. We multiply these 3 things together right here, 3 times 0.14 times P, and the order doesn't matter. I get 0.42 P. If I want to get P, I can divide it out. And P comes out to, I get $809.52. There's the principal. That's how much she loaned him. Try one more. Carrie's investment matured today. She invested, there's a principal. She earned, there's a rate, and she received this amount at maturity. So that amount is made up of what she started with plus some interest. If I want to figure out the interest, I can take how much she gets back, subtract how much she actually invested, 12,500, and I'll learn that she made that much money. The question was how many months did she invest for? So I'm looking for time. So I equals PRT. Our interest, 171.88. Principal, 12,500. Rate, it has a decimal in it, but it's not a decimal yet. I got to turn it into 0.055, right? Divide by 100, or move it 2 spots to the left. And my time, I don't know. So 171.88, 12,500 times 0.055 will give me 687.54.5. Okay, I want to solve that for t. So 171.88 divided by 687.5. So for t, I get 0.25. Now that's in years. Time is always in years unless we say otherwise. The question asks us for how many months. So if I want to go to months, sorry, my months will be, well, there's 12 months in a year, and I want 0.25 of that. In other words, 3 months. Okay, simple interest. We can solve for any parts and pieces as long as we know 3 of the 4 things. Just some key things. Make sure your rate's as a percent turned into a decimal. Your time has to be in years. So you come across things like weeks or months or days, you have to convert them. And if you're given the amount and the principal, you can always solve for the interest. Some questions you should probably try, just make sure you can do some simple interest. And then we'll move on to the last lesson of this course, compound interest.